All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to this ITIF event on the 4th anniversary of the release of the National Broadband Plan. And I feel a little bit like John Belushi, bringing back the band. And folks who really, I think, didn't sleep for many, many months, particularly Blair, in producing what I still think is the best broadband plan been produced anywhere in the world. You look around the world, there are a lot of different countries that try to do these things, and I think this ranks as really the premier work in that, and that's really due to Blair's leadership and then the great team that Blair helped assemble. And we're lucky to have a bunch of that team here today. So I'm going to introduce folks, and then we're just going to hear from each person, starting with Blair. I do have to say, though, I noticed in reading this, Blair, go back and just reading a little bit of it. If you haven't seen this, by the way, it's still worth a good read, a lot of good information in there, that there were 23,000 comments. How many of those did you actually read? 22,000?
Personally? Oh, about 22,950, I think.
I think that was it, yeah. So, a couple of quick advertisements, by the way. One of the things about broadband, and particularly a lot of the national purpose apps, are that they really are going to be able to drive progress. And so with that shameless pitch, something we just launched here, if you haven't taken this test, please do. It's kind of fun. A little quiz at doyoulikeprogress.org. But it's 10 questions, and it'll tell you whether you're a Luddite or a Silicon Valley innovator. Surprisingly, so far, the people who've taken the test, not everybody is like us. I don't know why that is the case, but it's strange. But anyway, fun thing to take. So let me start with introductions. Blair Levin is Communications and Society Fellow at Aspen Institute. I'm going to really go through the introductions quite briefly. Blair, as I said, led the National Broadband Plan. Pardon me?
You can just skip it all.
I could skip it all. Spent 8 years before that at Legg Mason and Stiff L. Nicholas as an analyst, chief of staff to FCC Chairman Reed Hunt, and many, many other important things. Next to Blair is Admiral Jamie Barnett. Jamie now is co-chair of the telecom group at Eventful. He has 30 years experience in the Navy, including as a rear admiral and other positions. He was also chief of public safety and homeland security in the FCC, where he helped with those components of the plan. John Horrigan is a communications and tech policy consultant. Has a long background in this space, particularly around issues of broadband adoption. He had been at the Joint Center for Political Economic Studies, also at TechNet. He played a key role on a lot of the metrics around adoption in the development of the plan, and had been, before that, Associate Director of Research at the Pew Internet and American Life Project. Steve Midgley is a consulting principal at MixRun, which is a consultancy for-profit and education sector organizations. Previously had been Deputy Director of EdTech at DOE, and was also Director of Education at the FCC, where he played a key role in the plan's education component. Nick Sinai is the Deputy Chief Technology Officer in the White House. He is playing a key role in open data. In fact, Nick was kind enough to speak at our Big Data Innovation Day conference recently. He played a key role in the National Broadband Plan when he was at the FCC, particularly overseeing many of the issues around energy. Prior to that, he was a venture capitalist at a couple of different firms. We're going to be joined by the magic of Skype by Mohit Kaushal, who is coming to us from San Diego. Dr. Kaushal is with Aberdare Ventures. He had been the chief strategy officer at a place called West Health, which was focusing on wireless and health issues out of San Diego, and then was director of Connected Health at the FCC as well, and led their efforts on health. So I'm going to have Blair kick us off, and we'll go down the line.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having us. And I have to acknowledge one of our teammates who was, Joe Heaps is a teammate of ours who was over there, and the fact that people can actually read this and it reads in English is entirely due to Eric Garr, who's here and probably the single most the single most important person on the team. Certainly our point guard in a lot of different areas, and it's great to see him. I was thinking about this. We started about 5 years ago, actually, and every time there's broadband-related news, a court decision, a merger, or a hearing, there's a spate of articles in which people who thought the U.S. was falling behind 5 years ago say precisely the same thing, and people who thought 5 years ago that we were doing great say precisely the same thing. A debate where everyone recycles what they were saying 5 years ago, of course, is not really a recipe for progress. Moreover, a lot of those debates are about international rankings, and international rankings always reflect decisions that were made a long time ago. And one of the things that I'm very grateful that Rob always focuses on is what are we doing now to lead in the future? And that's really the idea of this forum, is to do that, but it was also the idea of the plan. And what the plan focused on, and frankly what every national broadband plan really focuses on, there are 4 things that societies need to be doing. They need to be driving fiber deeper, using spectrum more efficiently, getting everybody on, and using the platform to improve how we deliver public sector goods, as well as things like economic development. And those 4 things are all intimately related. The right question is, how are we executing on those 4? So I'm just going to give a quick overview. I have to say that I'm a bit surprised but delighted that on 1 and 3, we're actually doing better than I anticipated. Though it's curiously not having anything to do with specific recommendations in the plan or federal government actions. It really has to do with discussions that were germinated in the plan, particularly Google Fiber and Comcast Internet Essentials, which in the plan was the adoption, the A+ adoption program proposed by cable. On the fiber side, Google has not just sparked activities in about 40 communities now, but has also developed, there's been a lot of competitive reaction, both from incumbents like AT&T and CenturyLink. There have been new entrants by people like C-Spire doing a similar thing in Mississippi. The Gig.U project that I helped put together that has activities in about 18 different communities. There's certainly some overlap. But and what I think is not commonly understood is how Google's new effort, where they just announced 34 communities, is really leading to a learning exercise that can be taken advantage of by all communities about how do you make a more fiber-friendly economic environment, deployment environment. So I think that's really going to prove to be valuable. On the adoption side, Comcast is clearly leading. They're doing a great job and deserve praise for both the increase in the momentum as well as making it permanent. Now, one reason they're succeeding is that they're, like Google, they're a learning machine. They're actually learning, and one of the people they're learning from is John Horrigan, who I think did tremendous work with the plan, but actually I think has some tremendously new important insights on digital readiness that I hope he'll share today, but I think deserve a lot more attention than it's getting from policymakers. Now, one interesting question we actually don't know the answer to, and maybe when we come back in 5 years or something, it'll be really interesting to see whether Comcast's approach to getting everyone on, which is fundamentally very focused on kind of low-income communities or low-adoption communities, will actually result in higher adoption levels than what Google is doing, which is to kind of flood a community with bandwidth, including having an offer which is close to free, a $300 one-time fee. I don't know the answer to that, and I think it's really interesting to watch. And now, I've noted recently some of my friends on the left have criticized Comcast because that's what they do, and some of my friends on the left have criticized Google because they're not happy with some things Google is doing in this. And I actually think they're both wrong. I think having 2 different models is great, and I think let them both rip and let's study it and learn from it. And they'll learn from each other and they'll react to each other, and so that should be worth doing. I also just want to say from the point of view of planning, it is really interesting that it is not the plan itself, but rather the discussions that germinated from the plan that really may have the biggest impact. So in that regard, if anyone else wants to do the plan next time, don't dismiss the possibility that non-governmental action actually turns out to be more important. There are certain areas, of course, that can only be done by the government. The most important one probably is spectrum. A couple years ago, I gave a speech where I was actually somewhat pessimistic. I'm now much more optimistic. There's a written version of this that'll go up on the Aspen website and the ITIF website that lists a half dozen things that have happened that I think we've actually made significant progress, both in having a diversity of spectrum allocations as well as taking spectrum that was lying fallow and not and making it more useful. We're not there yet. We have the incentive auction coming up. And I might note, I think we should aspire to recapture as much as possible. But just as Tom Wheeler appropriately said, this is going to happen in 2015, not 2014. I think we have to reset expectations about the amount of spectrum we're going to get. But nonetheless, given what we were looking at in 2009, I feel fairly comfortable that the spectrum auction, which is subject to a lot of market vagaries, is going to end up being a very, very positive thing. Then there's the fourth bucket, and that's really delivering goods and services. I'm going to let the other folks here, who I might not know. Not only was it a wonderful pleasure to work with them, but it's really incredible how many people who worked in the plan are still working on similar things, still trying to achieve the vision, both in the private sector and the public sector. I do, I regret that Dr. Moe is coming in from Skype. If we had really succeeded, he'd be a holographic image sitting at this table right now. Maybe the next time. But the final thought that I've expressed in some countries I've been in recently is, at the end of the day, the execution of the plan is more important than the plan itself. Good execution can overcome problems in the plan or mistakes in the plan. You can have a perfect plan, but if you execute badly, it will be as if it didn't happen. And so it makes me particularly grateful that we had this opportunity to revisit it, rethink about it, and hopefully learn something that we didn't know and didn't say 5 years ago.
Great. Blair, thank you for that overview. Jamie, you want to?
So, Rob, thank you so much, and Blair for getting me involved, and it's good to be with you. Thank you for coming out on a rainy day that at least doesn't have snow. I also want to acknowledge the other team members that worked on the public safety aspect of the National Broadband Plan, in particular Jennifer Manor, who kind of led up a lot of the efforts for that, among a lot of people in and outside the Commission. So the National Broadband Plan, Chapter 16, in the 4 paragraphs that Blair allowed us, no, he didn't. He allowed us more than that, but he and Eric constrained it. Concentrated on 3 things at least I'll touch on today. First was broadband for first responders and public safety in general, cybersecurity, and then 911. A good portion of Chapter 16 is devoted to a national public safety broadband network. And on this, I think there are indicators of tremendous progress. When the plan came out as something that I can't remember if we just said it's adjunct to it, the FCC conducted a cost model on what it would take to build a public safety broadband network under the concept that we had at that point, where it would be a leveraged network among all of the commercial networks, not a new build, not a greenfield build. And we came up with, on that concept, about a $7 billion cost for that aspect of it. We also suggested that public safety and the states would need operating funds, because in essence they would have to operate their current voice-driven communications even as the public safety broadband network came into being, and it would not be a voice network at first. The Congress decided not to do that, but they did step forward by, of course, clearing up the D-block controversy that had been extant before, and devoting some 24 megahertz to a national public safety broadband network, which we now know as FirstNet, creating an authority under the Department of Commerce to do that, and giving them certain funding, $2 billion to begin with, an additional $5 billion. So all of that is tremendous. I mean, it's an amazing investment in a national asset, and in the meantime, they have started doing some great things. Now, you said you recycle things every 5 years. I'm only going to recycle from 2 years, so my recycle time is much better. But in 2012, while I was at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies, I brought together a group that included some other FCCers, including Bruce Gottlieb and John Piha and some other experts, and looked at kind of where it was and where it was going based on the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, which in essence created FirstNet. And in that time, and I'll have to tell you, so the legislation is great in that it enables this network. It didn't give the people who are actually going to be enacting FirstNet it didn't do any favors. It is a very complicated act. There are a lot of restrictions and things that they have to stay within as they move forward. In the report, what should FirstNet do first? I simply lined up some of the things that they could look at, one of which, of course, was to make sure that they went out and got just outstanding people. And I can tell you have done that with Bill D'Agostino, with T.J. Kennedy, with others that they brought on board, which has been at the governmental pace. It has not been at a pace that they would have liked. I think a lot of people would have liked them to go further, but they have moved forward on that. In the report, though, I suggested, though, that it was going to take a long time to stand up this network. And one of the other things that I suggested was that they really, really needed to make sure that they articulated to their customers, which most people thought were public safety, but public safety is actually users, but the customers were the states. And then secondly, that they needed to be able to articulate one or a set of options of business plans or business concepts of how this was going to operate so that people could figure out how much it would cost. And right now, I would say they're behind on that. The states are relatively alienated from this and have felt cut out of the process. And that ultimately is going to be a detractor to it. Some of the early deployments that we had set up have not moved forward because FirstNet stopped them. There may have been very good reasons for that, but that added to the feeling that the states are not being included in this. And then the other thing that concerns me is that they really have not come out, publicly at least, with the business plan. What is this going to cost and that sort of stuff. And that makes me feel like that perhaps the way the statute is set up, it may be very difficult to make this work. Now, once again, you've got great people working on it, and so that's good. So major successes and still major challenges. On 911, the plan put forward concepts for moving forward on the next generation of packet switched 911 as opposed to the circuit switch, the one that we've known and have kind of bolted stuff onto as wireless and cable and other things came along. There has been progress here. I mean, I would say text to 911 is not broadband, but it does get people beyond the thought that it's just voice and that we can move on to other media as in using 911 and calling for help. We called for, in essence, NHTSA to come out with a plan to help inform Congress because a packet switch 911 network is different and it needs to have some uniformity across the states, which is going to cost money. And NHTSA, in fact, has now gotten funded for and is impaneled a blue ribbon panel on 911. And then I'll move over quickly to the cybersecurity, which recommended that there be a FCC look strongly at the reliability and security of our networks. In America, we've come to rely on. As a matter of fact, we don't even think about how reliable our communication system. It is the envy of the world. The fact of the matter is we don't know quite as much about the broadband networks. Is it as reliable? It is not, as there's not a reporting mechanism when things go wrong to the FCC the way there is for the legacy communication system. And here, I don't know that there's been as much, there's certainly been a lot of planning on those kind of things, a lot of inquiry. Obviously, the decision that came down early this year with the net neutrality may have some effect on that, on what the FCC can do, and it is certainly exploring through its civic process and voluntary measures what it can do to improve both reliability and security. And so with that, I'll stop.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. John.
Thank you, Rob. I'm John Horrigan, and I worked quite a bit on the broadband adoption portion of the National Broadband Plan, how to increase the rate of home broadband adoption. And when we did the plan in 2009, 2010, we had about 65% of Americans with broadband at home. That number has gone up to, according to NTIA, to about 72% since then. So we've had steady progress over the past few years on broadband adoption. The real game changer in the adoption space has been with wireless. Smartphones have certainly transformed how a lot of people get access to the internet. And I'm reminded of that very long commission meeting we had in September when we had 140 some slides to give an interim report to commissioners on how the broadband plan was going. And we had a sort of where are we going slide that had a prediction from a market research firm about where smartphones would be by 2012. And that slide predicted that by 2012, 25% of Americans would have smartphones. And the real number is closer to 50%. It's up to about 56%.
They weren't wrong, right?
They were they were half-wits, but they were half-wits. No. But it just goes to show you that Yogi Berra is always right. It's really hard to make predictions, especially about the future. So smartphones certainly have changed a lot when it comes to access to the internet. And when you glue smartphone access together with home broadband adoption, you get a little more than 80% of Americans have what I call advanced internet access, either a broadband subscription at home or a smartphone. For the most part, people who have broadband at home do have smartphones, so smartphones tend to supplement how people go online. And for that reason, I believe that the home broadband adoption number is still a very important number to be cognizant of, because it does serve for so many people as the anchor to their connectivity experience. Their smartphones or their other wireless devices ride on the Wi-Fi that people have on their home networks, which comes off of a home broadband subscription. So we've done, in terms of home broadband adoption, okay in the past 4 years. And we've also had the opportunity to learn a lot of lessons on how to increase broadband adoption over the past several years. And we have two models to learn from. One is what NTIA has done with the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, $250 million in investment in sustainable broadband adoption that has connected something like 600,000 households with the various projects that they've funded around the country. And a lot of that money was leveraged with investment from other nonprofit or private sector sources. The other big set of lessons comes from the Internet Essentials program, and thank you, Blair, for the ad for research I've done recently on Internet Essentials. About 2 weeks ago, I came out with a report that is based on a survey of 2,000 Internet Essentials customers, and my thanks to Comcast for giving me the opportunity to work with them and really having the foresight to engage in some research into how the Internet Essentials program is going. So it's a very unique opportunity as a researcher to look at 2,000 households who are fairly new broadband adopters, and ask a bunch of questions on how the process is going in terms of transitioning from not having broadband at home to having broadband at home, and what hooks them to broadband. And the lessons there have a lot to do with how the expectations of the world around non-broadband users are really shaping how they search for ways to get online. Internet Essentials is aimed at low-income families with children, and the goal is to get connectivity for the purpose of improving how they access educational resources. So these households are all about getting broadband at home in order to help kids with schoolwork. The other findings adjacent to schoolwork are extremely interested. 65% said of respondents in the Comcast Internet Essentials survey said that banks and financial institutions expect them to have broadband at home. Over 50% said government agencies expect them to have broadband at home. Over 50% said that healthcare institutions and insurance companies expect them to have broadband at home. So the expectations around connectivity is shaping how people who don't have broadband go about searching for ways to get online. And one big lesson that comes away from this for me is that we've learned that broadband adoption is really a big tech transfer problem among a diverse, large, and widely distributed set of individuals around the country that don't have broadband at home. And when you're trying to solve tech transfer problems, typically you want to engage in technology pull, not technology push, which is to say you want to set up a system by which people have the opportunity to get the service, understand on their own how to gain the skills to get broadband, give them an opportunity to learn in safe places such as libraries or community nonprofits on how to use broadband. And by engaging in technology pull, you sort of draw people into broadband with the right kinds of programs that can help them feel comfortable in getting broadband. This is as distinct from technology push, when you just hope that if you just develop the right package at the right price point, people will see the light and they will go get broadband at home. I think we've learned through some of the work I've been able to do with Internet Essentials, through some of the work that BTOP has done in drawing lessons from its programs, that it's really not about technology push, it's about technology pull in terms of how you set up sort of the right environments to get people online and to help them respond to this growing weight of expectations that society does have, that everybody is connected. So in my view, this sets up a couple of ideas as to where we go from here. One, it does remain the case that we have anywhere between 25 and 30% of the country not online with broadband at home. So a lot of the initiatives that BTOP has funded, a lot of the initiatives out there to try to increase broadband adoption, many of them are with stimulus funding expiring. They're out of money, but they're not out of mission. So I do think, given that the problem does remain, we need to start to think about additional sources of funding, not just from the private sector, but from state, local, and federal governments to help continue some of the work that has started over the past couple of years. I also think we have to expand the set of participants who we expect to support digital inclusion initiatives. I mentioned that banks and health insurance companies, according to respondents of the survey of Internet Essentials customers, expect people to have broadband at home. Well, these institutions are increasingly delivering services by digital means. They see efficiencies in doing so. I think they need to start to understand that the true last mile of the equation of delivering services digitally is making sure that everybody is online. So I think these kinds of institutions need to be part of the funding equation for supporting broadband adoption. And then finally, I think we have to start to think a lot more broadly about what we need to do to have a digital society going forward. We've talked sort of the framing for this problem for a good 20 years has been the digital divide, which confines the problem to those who are not connected to the internet at home. My thinking has evolved in the past couple of years to such that I think we do have to start to think about not the digital divide, but digital readiness, as Blair teed up, the notion that various institutions, government, banks, internet service providers have to understand that we need to raise the level of skills for all Americans as we go to a society where more and more things are delivered digitally. You know, the Internet of Things is upon us. Everybody's very excited about all the nifty applications that it will enable, and there's no question these are going to be game-changing applications. At the same time, we have a wide variety, a great deal of variation in the level of digital skills in not just the non-internet using population, but the set of the population that is very well connected. And we have to understand that not everybody's going to have the skills to fully embrace these applications, which means they will roll out more slowly than some people would like, and that we have to provide the resources and the tools to enable people to get comfortable with using some of these new applications that are going to require a whole lot of trust and sharing of data that some people just may not be comfortable with. If we develop the tools and the means to help people become informed about these applications, I think they're about to roll out a lot more quickly. So with that, I will turn it over to.
Thank you, John. The part of it on where education is one of those applications that compels or urges people to get online. It's a good segue to Steve. You can talk about the education part of this.
Yeah. So my name is Steve Midgley, and I led the team on the education chapter development, and I've been actually largely very pleased and surprised at how much of the education chapter recommendations, how many of the education chapter recommendations have been either adopted already, implemented already, or are in the process of being adopted right now. That said, we did not put the kitchen sink into the recommendations. There were a number of ambitious, maybe overly aggressive proposals that at the time and place would have been hard for various agencies to accept and adopt. And those times have changed. And to speak to maybe the quality of the education chapter in terms of we got energy working on it now. Nick over at the White House is not just working on energy; he's also been a big supporter. And so the policy dimensions have changed. And so what's possible now is gone beyond what was possible in the broadband plan. And so that to me is incredibly encouraging. I don't think I don't think many people expected this amount of movement in this amount of time in the education space. I think a number of forces have been driving that, and I'll get down to the specifics in the government, but a big force in this is device adoption. That device adoption has exceeded expectations, exceeded projections, and as a result it's driving broadband deployment. It's driving demand and expectations in schools in particular. So bring your own device programs have expanded rapidly in the US, where students and teachers are bringing whatever devices they have into the learning environment and using them in the best ways that they can. Deployment of systems like Google Apps for Education, a free open platform for use for free in schools, has driven a lot of people to see potential that they couldn't see before, when everything was hinged on an $8 per student fee for this and a $3 per student fee for that, and everything's added up very rapidly to be unimplementable. Now there's a lot of interesting alternative resources available. In addition, learning opportunities themselves are diversifying rapidly, moving into non-traditional learning spaces, largely driven by access to broadband. So for example, the whole MOOC phenomenon was just emerging as the broadband plan was being written and didn't really take off in a significant way. Beyond that, other non-traditional learning opportunities that move outside of even the sort of MOOCs are largely look like university courses but are represented in alternative media, and non-traditional learning opportunities, Skillshare and other products that are out there that are providing people the chance to teach what they know and to learn what they need to know in totally non-certified, undegreed, and open environments is changing the way that people understand what education is. So if we wrote the education chapter now, we couldn't necessarily just focus on schools, universities, and libraries. We would have to expand it into a retail component, and that is quite surprising, quite interesting, and bodes tremendous change in the education sector in the next decade. Clay Shirky has said recently, who's a strong thinker in a lot of spaces around internet access, we're going to have to make education cheaper because we don't know how to make it better. And so what he's saying is, in the elite four-year schools, we're doing as good a job as we can do, and that means that those schools and that value proposition isn't going to be worth any more to people in the future because there's no room at the top to improve what they're doing. So that has implications as you look down into the education system, which says we may be capped out on quality, in which case economics dictates that something else is going to change in the equation, and he suggests that cost is going to cause major disruption in the education space, that the last 50 years, driven by the GI Bill and on forward, have created an economic environment that is unsustainable, especially in higher education. So for whatever that insight is worth. Related to that, and I don't think I think it's quite closely related, is private capital investment in education has been growing tremendously in the last 5 years. And that's largely based on internet-enabled strategies for new businesses and schools' ability to uptake those There's a lot of speculative investment. Some people wonder if we're in the middle of an education internet bubble. That's very possible. In fact, I would say that it's likely. But nevertheless, we're seeing a tremendous amount of innovation, and it's very difficult to roll back innovation once you accomplish it. So then to get to specifics, we've seen the FCC either implement or propose to implement almost every recommendation that was made in the broadband plan, which to me is just incredibly encouraging. That just shows a tremendous amount of leadership and leadership across commissioners. So that's to me just encouraging and very hopeful. We've also seen $1.2 billion announced recently in corporate contributions to support the rollout that the FCC, the White House, and others, the U.S. Department of Ed, are taking. FCC recently announced $2 billion in one-time infrastructure funding, as well as on the tail ends of a regulatory process to reform the E-rate program, the primary tool. It puts out about $2.5 billion a year in support for schools and libraries to adopt broadband. Some highlights there just briefly. They want to focus on connecting devices, so following the path from where the bits are to where they want to be, and from the service provider to the user, and phase out some of the other parts of the program that don't strengthen that pipeline. And I think that's a very encouraging, very progressive and useful strategy. That involves things that can be controversial, like phasing out support for voice communications in the old copper networks. So if you can switch to VoIP, then you can get support in E-rate, but potentially over some period of time, we will be looking at a copper phase out. Now, we didn't even have the ability at the time to put that into plan, but FCC is still going after that. So I just want to flag them for being aggressive about not just looking at the specific line items in the plan, but looking at the intent and thrust of the plan. A number of highlights very quickly. They're incentivizing the infrastructure build out. So E-rate has been poor at infrastructure capital investment and strong on recurring cost, and they're looking at ways to strengthen the infrastructure and capital cost rollouts. They also want to make more cost-effective purchasing decisions. There's a lot of waste that we know in E-rate, and there's a lot of ways to solve that, and I think they're on a good path to find some of those. In addition, U.S. Department of Ed has taken on a number of recommendations that were made to them. They supported the Learning Registry Project, which is a recommendation unnamed in the National Broadband Plan to make content more available, and the White House has been very supportive of that as well. And there's a Connected Educator program proposing right now $200 million in supporting teachers. This speaks to that question of you can put all the broadband you want in front of people, but if they don't have a vision of what to do with it, they won't make effective use. And so this $200 million proposal in the current budget that's moving around would support teachers to understand better how to make use of the learning opportunities that are exploding on the internet through broadband. So that's my summary. Nick may have a few more elements to add about the education chapter as well as the energy section.
Great, thank you. Nick?
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. You guys have done such a great job. I had talking points for the entire plan as the administration representative, but I think I'll just stick to Chapter 12, the energy environment one. And so in Chapter 12, we had four themes or series of recommendations. One was about unlocking energy innovation. And I think energy innovation is a hot topic today when you think about Nest or O-Power or some really interesting cloud-connected services and companies that are growing fast and delivering innovative services. The second series of recommendations were about modernizing the electric grid with broadband and other advanced communications to make it more reliable and resilient. The third was about improving the energy efficiency and environmental impact of the IT, broadband, and communications sector broadly. And the fourth was about transportation, transitioning to a cleaner and safer, more efficient transportation sector. And there's really exciting things happening in all four of those themes. There's two that I'll talk about briefly. So I guess we'll work backwards. On transportation, so much is going on. I mean, if you just think about where we're talking about in terms of self-driving cars and drone policy and so forth, there's so many great things about where we're going, but still there's some good progress on connected cars, but I won't really touch on that. And then on the energy efficiency and environmental impact of the ICT sector, There's also been some good progress. The administration has been working on moving to the cloud and consolidating data centers. There's some good stuff coming out of EPA. The two areas that I'll talk about are modernizing the grid with advanced communications and energy innovation, especially focused around data innovation. So starting with smart grid policy, the administration was inspired to write its own smart grid or grid modernization policy that was heavily informed by Chapter 12. I say that because I was an author of both. It helps.
You got to hand in your homework twice?
Just copy, replace.
Did you get the same grade?
What grade did I get for the first one?
Good question. We're still looking at it.
Yeah. But there are some common themes, right? So we have some big challenges in energy environment, where we have 3,000 electric utilities, very different regulatory regimes, different capital assets, different legacy infrastructure, different types of ways that they generate and deliver power. And so really there's no one size that fits all. And certainly the ability to increasingly leverage advanced communications, IP networking, both private IP networking and the public network has been tremendously important. I think at the time the broadband plan came out, we were at about 10 or 15 million smart meters. Today we're much closer to 50 million smart meters, quickly on a path to be, I think one report put it at 65 million in a couple short years. So we're really have been investing. So part of that's been Recovery Act money, about $4.5 billion of Recovery Act money. With ratepayer money, it was almost $10 billion. But that's really been a down payment on the investment that the utility space has made to modernize their infrastructure. And it's for a number of reasons. It's not just billing, but it really is about reliability and resilience. It's about empowering consumers and accommodating more distributed generation and so forth. So there's a whole and the future of electric vehicles and so forth. So there's a number of reasons why the electric industry has been modernizing. And broadband and advanced communications is a big piece of that. The cellular networks, the 3G and 4G networks, actually are increasingly important pieces of those communication networks. On the data innovation piece, this is something that has been very close to my heart as well. And so this was an idea in the National Broadband Plan that energy customers should get access to their own data. It's an idea, a policy principle articulated by the administration in a 2011 grid modernization report that energy customers should get access to their own data. And after having written it twice, we thought, why don't we actually make this a reality? And so the Obama administration partnered with the electric utility industry, and now 100 million Americans can get access to their own energy usage data. And this is a great example of the electric utility industry stepping up, completely voluntary initiative in partnership, nudged and inspired by the White House, but based upon industry standards and the electric industry stepping up to make customers of all sizes. So this is residential, commercial, even industrial and government customers being able to have access to their own energy usage information. And why is that important? Well, it means that you can make energy efficiency decisions on your own, but it's also fuel for private sector services, energy management services. So just as an example, previously you essentially had to get a bunch of paper bills and give those to a solar installer. These days, increasingly, being able to transfer your energy information on a one-time or on a regular basis, you'd be able to kind of shop for solar installers. In the commercial building world, being able to go from an energy audit where you walk the building to now there's a number of growing startup companies and large companies that are offering virtual energy audits. So the idea that software is taking over what was a very manual process. And I think we see that in all of these verticals, in health and energy, education, public safety, is software is really transforming, and data innovation is really transforming these. And another theme, just in listening and thinking through all of these national purposes, is the notion of personalization or individualization, right? And so if that's energy efficiency measures aren't really useful on average. What's important is how they're relevant to my house and to my usage. Same thing with education. What you really care about is how your kids are learning and what are the kinds of interventions that are going to help them. The same thing is true with healthcare. You don't care about healthcare on average. You care about targeted interventions for your particular case. And so that's what's really exciting is the data innovations on top of broadband across all of these different verticals. On this notion of being able to get access to your own data, in Green Button, so we've partnered with 48 utilities and electricity suppliers that serve 59 million homes and businesses, and already 42 million homes and businesses are live, and so that's how we get to the over 100 million Americans today. But it's not just in energy. In fact, the Obama administration has been working on this personal data or my data concept across a number of verticals. And in fact, one of the better known one is actually the blue button in healthcare. And this started in 2010 with the VA making veteran prescription data available back to those veterans safely and securely. So a veteran could log in and get access to their own prescription data. And that's important because veterans get a significant amount of care outside of the VA system. So being able to bring your own prescription data, and veterans sometimes have complex case histories, to bring that to doctors outside of the VA system actually help prevent serious incidents. And that's grown across the entire health ecosystem. And I won't steal Mo's thunder too much, but right now the Blue Button initiative, which has been this great partnership of labs and hospitals and doctors and electronic health vendors and so forth, have enabled 150 million Americans to get access to some form of their healthcare information, so that they can make more informed health decisions, but also as fuel for more personalized services and software. So we're taking this My Data notion to other places in education. You can get your own student loan information from the Department of Education. And the IRS this year launched this notion of being able to get your own tax information. So they call it Get Transcript, and you're able to download 3 years of your own personal tax information. And that's important when you think about not only doing your taxes, but you think about income verification and how that is a critical determinant in lending and other financial services. So this My Data, which wasn't just in Chapter 12, I went back and flipped through, I saw in Chapter 14, there was actually this idea of a mydata.com or mydata.gov about what if we could centralize it. And while we're not at the point where we're centralizing one place where you can get all of the information that the government can provide to you, we are working across a number of agencies so that taxpayers, citizens, Americans can get access to their own information in easy to use, easy to read, and portable formats. So we're really excited to continue to work on that.
Great, thank you, Nick. I think the centralization place, I think that's called the NSA, isn't it?
But not everyone has access. They have
access is a problem. Exactly. I couldn't resist that. I know, so. All right, so Dr. Mo, are you there? Can you hear us? We're calling, I guess. Okay.
There. Good morning.
Great. Will, could you get the lights up here, please? Good morning, or good afternoon for us. Good morning for you. So thank you, Mo, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So I have a couple of slides which I won't spend too much time on, but how about we go through that and then happy to answer questions at the end.
Great.
So I'm on my second slide, if you can bring that up. Perfect. So I know Blair had some opening statements, which of course I can hear, but the elegance of the national priorities within the broadband plan was that we really thought about the context of each of these industries within the broader ecosystem. So it was not just about connectivity, but what connectivity would enable. So I thought it was pertinent to give an update, not just on the FCC specific pieces, but more about healthcare and the ecosystem in general, because a lot has happened over the last couple of years. So that the four key areas I'm going to jump into quickly. First of all, just revisiting the macroeconomics, which I really think drives some of the key policy changes that have occurred under health reform and in other areas of the world. The third piece, then we talk about how is the market reacting to these very significant policy changes, what's actually going on in the marketplace in terms of evolution. And then finally, focusing on the FCC, because it's been great to see on the sidelines that healthcare has become much bigger and more important focus area for the FCC. And I think they've done a great job in the agency to push forward the agenda. So next slide, this is my third slide. So first of all, we're going to cover the macroeconomics, which then is now slide 4. So I'm sure many of you know the scenario that we're facing. So right now, the US spends 18, going into 19% of GDP on healthcare, which is much more than any other country. And unfortunately, we're not getting the outcomes that I think we deserve. And this is driven by a number of reasons. Fee-for-service reimbursement systems is definitely a key driver, but also natural demographics. You have more elderly people coming into the population who, by definition, have more chronic disease that drives more cost. And then to compound this, we just haven't got enough professionals to start managing these people, both in terms of doctors and registered nurses. So therein lies the problem, but also the opportunity where technology can have a key role in solving some of these problems, but definitely mitigating them. Next slide. So we're now going to come into the policy changes. Slide 6 will jump into. Again, this is a very savvy DC crowd, I'm assuming, so you folks know more about this than some of the people that I meet on the entrepreneurial circuit. But I try to find, again, some of the largest pieces of the policy stuff going on in healthcare. 5 big areas. Happy to go into Q&A at the end, but very simply, first of all, on the data side, the High-Tech Act, which actually came before health reform, which is where meaningful use sits, is essentially sending a lot of data to come into the system. On top of that, CMS and HHS, and to Todd Park's credit, the government's liberating a lot of healthcare data, which now industry and entrepreneurs are taking hold of and creating these really interesting products. The data producer, which we held later on this year, is a prime example of that. The second piece, payment model changes. You probably heard a lot of acronyms around ACO, bundled payments, 30-day readmission rules. I'm just going to keep this very simple. In essence, a hospital is getting more incentive for what goes on outside its 4 walls versus inside. So the right tools, technologies, and services that enable better management of expensive patients outside the hospital will get rewarded. That's definitely my bet now as an investor. And if you think about that from the technology stack, we now need to capture data from patients everywhere. So prerequisite connectivity is required, which is where the FCC definitely sits in, but then there's a lot of other problems on top of that we need to figure out in terms of the interoperability of data. Then we can think about the analytics that are applied into this next generation data we're capturing. The third piece, the medical loss ratios. So these are the rules around how much insurers have to spend on medical care versus admin. The insurance exchanges, which are now going on live, and as you know, created a huge market now on the individual side versus just group insurance. And then finally, just coverage expansion. More and more people are coming into the system. So the next slide is now highlighting that we're going to go into the market reaction. So this is slide 8. So what I tried to do is just to highlight how successful these things have been. First of all, around the data input, meaningful use absolutely captured more data into the system. Just look at the adoption of EMRs within hospitals and physicians, definitely trending in the right way. And then on top of that, the data release, I personally work with a number of companies that are using raw data release as part of this initiative, and many more in the ecosystem are doing that so far. In terms of payment model changes, I don't think anyone thought that suddenly overnight fee-for-service providers would start managing this. This is going to be a journey. I think it's fair to say the journey started in a positive way. There's a lot of experimentation. Providers are managing more and more risk. And for the companies that I'm working with now, a lot more business models are emerging around the payment model changes. Again, I think it's very fair to say this is going to be a trend that's going to continue for the next 5-10 years plus. The MLR has been interesting as well, as insurers are now expanding their business model in reaction to this and other things. So I find it very difficult to delineate United Health as being an insurance company and a technology company. They've bought some really interesting data technology assets, and they've spread in terms of other areas, both internationally and in the US, and many other players are doing this as well. The insurance exchange, people are adopting it. There are about 4 million Americans now who are enrolled in a marketplace plan. We at Aberdare just made an investment actually in a company called Gravy, which is taking advantage of the exchanges. So the private sector is reacting to this whole shift in the insurance industry. And again, I look at it as a new mechanism of distributing to individuals. And then finally, more people are coming into the system. I think we're still waiting on some of the states and whether they're going to join in Medicaid expansion or not. So it's hard to tell the exact number, but it's fair to say coverage is expanding. So the next slide 9, please. So there's always somewhat a disconnect between policy changes and how the market's reacting. The stat I always use is, let's just look at M&A activity in the healthcare ecosystem. So since 2008, and the analysis I did was till 2012, it was close to $900 billion, but given some of the other big ticket items that have been sort of carried out since then, we're now approaching over $1 trillion of M&A in healthcare. And again, I think this is a reflection of how many of the large players have realized that the future of healthcare and how it looks like, how it's paid for, how it's delivered is going to change, and the role of technology in that is going to be significant. So some of the large bets will be really interesting to see. And then finally, slide 10, and now moving into 11, just focusing in on the FTC. So I've been out of the agency now for a couple of years. It's been great to look on the sidelines and see how they have a dedicated healthcare team. They've got a dedicated individual just thinking about healthcare who has a requisite background. The mHealth Task Force was one of the first things that came out, which ended up in a lot of recommendations and a lot more collaboration between many different agencies. So skipping to the third bullet point, the interagency health IT strategy, a specific thing that came out with the FCC at the table, with the FDA and ONC and other relevant agencies to think about the regulatory framework as we think through technology, more importantly, data technology applied to healthcare. The FCC classically worked with the FDA on medical device inspection issues, of course, and this is where I think we'll push forward around the data side. And then the second bullet point covering one of the other big levers the FCC has, which is the pot of capital to help subsidize broadband connections, but also building out infrastructure. So the Healthcare Connect Fund was announced post-plan, which is an amalgamation of some of the recommendations, combining not only the subsidies, but also building infrastructure. So that's a very brief overview, and I'm probably going to stop there and then happy to go into Q&A.
Great, thank you, Mo. That was very helpful. So if we could go back to the video, wonderful. And so we got about 20, 25 minutes, so I could start, but let me see if there are questions or comments from anybody in the audience.
I'll ask a question.
Could you, everybody first identify yourself as well?
Yeah, Howard Buskirk with Communications Daily. It's been an interesting discussion of all the, and I just wanted, I think the big question is, at 4 years later, do you feel like it was all worth it, and that on the whole, and if you could go back, is there anything in particular that you would have focused on, or anything that you would have done differently?
Well, I'll start by saying, I think it was worth it. I think my wife might have a different point of view about it because it was a lot of hard work. But just listening to everybody reminds me of how much fun it was to have kind of this level of expertise gathered in a relatively small space, and it was a lot of fun. And I think from the country's point of view, there's no question that it was worth it. Whether you look at the economics of just the incentive auction alone will pay for the plan many times over and things like that. But also, I think in terms of, not just, you have Nick who did the plan and then went on to do the same thing with energy and improving. You have Steve who did the education technology plan. There are lots of different ways in which it was worth it. As to whether we do things differently, absolutely. And I, on the 1 year anniversary, one of the things that really bothers me about Washington policy making, and I kind of understand it, in business, when Rebecca and I were working on Wall Street, if you didn't change your point of view when facts changed, you lost your job. But in Washington, if you ever admit that you're changing your point of view, you'll lose your job. So analytically,
Are you a flip-flopper?
Yeah, exactly. I think there are a lot of things. And on the 1-year anniversary, I actually gave a speech in which I said, "Here are the mistakes. Here are the most important mistakes I think I made." I would tell you that if you don't think that way, you're not thinking right, and a lot of people in this town don't think that way. But the big thing that we were not able to do, and part of it was personnel. We tried to hire someone, and basically it took an incredible long period of time, and we actually weren't able to hire them. It was on data. Fortunately, Steve and Nick and others were able to do a lot of very interesting things on data. But the whole area of privacy, personal data privacy and security is huge. The open data thing is huge. If a plan were to be redone, I think you'd focus a lot more on that. I was just in Singapore kind of talking about, and they're way ahead of us on a lot of things. They're already, thinking about those kinds of things. That is one that is, clearly really important. And there are a number of other things. But, as I think you can see here, the whole point, and this, the single most important sentence to me in the plan, which actually neither Eric nor I wrote, it was written by probably the youngest person on the team. The opening sentence of Chapter 17, this plan is in beta and always will be. That's the spirit that we wanted to bring to it. And based on the work of everyone up here, that's the spirit that we brought to it. You don't make change all overnight, right? You do it one step at a time. And so if you have that spirit to say you do things differently, well, of course you do things differently.
And that's just Rust Cole kind of philosophizing
Right.
the data line, and we were 4 years ahead of it.
That's exactly right. I hope Matthew McConaughey plays me in the movie.
So I guess one thought is, I think, as I said earlier, I think there's a lot of really great work, and I think everybody's alluded to sort of how we move forward on a lot of this. But I still feel like this part of the plan is underappreciated, not necessarily in the administration, you guys are thinking, but just sort of underappreciated in the telecom policy debates. I think it's underappreciated on Capitol Hill. And the debate is largely this sort of, we've evolved into essentially should we have 10 or 20 megabits faster speeds? That's largely the existential crux of our existence now. And I'd rather, frankly, if we could improve sort of broadband adoption and then take up in all of these spaces, education, health, public safety, energy, transportation, by 10 or 15%, I would much rather have that right now. Much rather have that. I think we'd get a lot farther. I think that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the big opportunities. And I guess I'd just be curious about people's thoughts on that. I mean, are we, I know what I think, but I'm just curious, are we overweighting kind of this competition with Europe thing, the speed thing? It's not to say that speed's not important, as Blair, you've done with GiveU, good work on there, but are we not giving this space enough of attention in Washington? Steve and then John.
So I can't speak to the policy debate on broadband infrastructure more at a broad scale in the telecom industry, but I can speak. I was just working with a group of district and state CIOs this morning. I came over, I'll be going back this afternoon, who are workshopping with the Department of Ed to come up with ways to increase broadband adoption and deployment and the services related in education. And I can say for certain, because we're talking about it this morning, that increasing the usage, right, increasing the opportunities for usage, increasing the services is how you increase the broadband capacity, the speed. So it's not that I would rather have this or this, it's when you put this in front of teachers, when they all of a sudden have access to a set of services through the device that they didn't have before, and they obtain the skills to use it, then when the broadband infrastructure is ineffective in the school or they don't have enough pipe, then all of a sudden the community finds the money. And that's been the true story for at least education, which I can speak concretely to. The community supports the things that teachers need, and that's generally the sort of local control environment that we have. And so if you can't put a use in front of them, you're not going to get the adoption for speed.
Interesting. John, that sounds similar to your findings.
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely with what Steve just said. And I think the policy debate, if there's a disconnect I'm seeing here, is those of us working on the broadband plan 4 years ago got that, meaning we have to knit the tapestry together cohesively in order to make the vision of the plan work. And what you're identifying correctly, I think, Rob, is that a lot of people in the policy debate say, we need speed, we need more networks, we need X times increase in, pick the metric that tends to go towards network and hardware. And, the policy debate, I think, is presently beginning, in my view, not quite fast enough, but it's encouraging that it is beginning to see how accelerating usage can realize enormous benefits in a whole range of different areas. We all were living and breathing that stuff 4 years ago and understood it, but I think, in the past 4 years, there's been a lot of groundwork quietly laid that goes to increasing usage, trying ways to get more people online, increase broadband adoption. And now people are starting to have the, wow, if we really could make 10 percentage point gains in these different areas, given what we're projecting to be the revenue stream from the Internet of Things economy, 3 or 4 percentage points acceleration in adoption, uptake, whatever you call it, would have enormous payoffs. I think people are starting to get it, and I think people should accelerate their understanding of that dimension of the problem a whole lot more.
If I could use one go ahead.
Go with Jamie and Nick, and then also Mo, if you want to jump in after that, feel free.
I'm just going to use one word in your question to cover the fact that I'm answering something that's only loosely connected. But with regard to the services provided, one thing that I think is underappreciated is the fact that by getting 24 megahertz out to public safety networks, you're also pumping out a lot of spectrum to rural areas too, if you actually fulfill the concept of the plan. And I do think that may not be something that's as appreciated in Washington, and there probably need to be some adjustments to FirstNet anyway. May be difficult because of the legislation, but that's one of the benefits that we would gain if we follow through.
Because that spectrum could be used by others.
That's right.
Good. Nick?
I was going to say that speed is tremendously important, but it's only one piece of this equation and of this tapestry. So in K-12 schools, for example, the average school has about the same connectivity that an average American home has, but serves about 200 times as many users. And fewer than 20% of educators feel that their school's internet connection meets their teaching needs, their instructional needs. So that was part of the basis of why the president has called for the ConnectEd initiative to connect 99% of students with ultra-fast broadband and make sure that they have both the students and the teachers have the tools and the instructions and instructional ability and all of that pieces. So it's not just the speed; it's the entire stack, and it's part of the move to personalize learning. But I think there's more than speed, because and I think about public safety communications, and when I think about a lot of the communications in the energy space, the reliability and resiliency and interoperability are important issues. And so we saw the issue of interoperability both in public safety and in smart grid being as important as the raw speeds. And those get to issues of standards and standardization, which is always this interplay between government and private sector standards bodies.
So right here in the back, sir.
My name is Bob Schmidt. I have a broadband wireless company in rural America called Great American Broadband. But I want to direct my question to Nick. In my other life, I'm the executive director of the Pro Football Retired Players Association. We're working in collaboration with the military over the issue of traumatic brain injury. I was advised by 3 of my soldiers this week that their records in the military are not transferred to the VA. I said, how could that be? So I need you to find out if that's true. If it is, I hope you can correct that. Their medical records in the military are not transferred to the VA. How can the VA properly administer their needs?
Yeah, I'll help you out on that one. They're not. They're stored, and you can be provided, but that is an old concept, and it needs to be corrected. And it certainly could be if they were digitized the way that they need.
Yeah, and this is one issue that the administration has been working hard at and still needs to make additional progress. So this notion of interoperability and for data to flow from the DoD to the VA seamlessly is one that, frankly, we need to do a better job at.
Mo, did you want to respond to that as well? I don't know if you heard the question or not.
Absolutely, and then I think just in the grander scheme, interoperability of health data is pretty important in general for a whole variety of reasons. And the example you gave is a great sort of a great example of how that can manifest itself. There's many more in the private sector as well. I don't believe it's just a technology problem. But the technology is actually very simple. It's more of a policy and business model question. And again, as more of the incentives you use for coordinating care versus just driving transaction, I hope to see some change.
Gary Arlen from Arlen Communications. John, the study you just did on acceptance, let me back up a second. I believe somewhere in the report itself there was an acknowledgement, not a study on it, but that entertainment would drive a lot of this broadband adoption. Certainly, the world is a lot different now than it was in 2010, Netflix. And I'm trying to put three ideas together here. What Rob said jokingly about the NSA tells us something that people are concerned about when broadband gets into their lives. So anywhere in your study or your other research, have you found that acceptance is either pushed ahead by doing other things and then learning, oh yeah, my bank, my insurance company, my doctor wants to get it, and also I can get Netflix and video games, or at the same time it's being pushed back by this concern headlined every day for the last year, almost 8 months, that it's a dangerous area.
For the Essentials of Connectivity study, you're talking about,
well, anything.
Yeah, you're talking about young, fairly young respondents, families with school-aged children. That's less of an issue for that demographic, and they're they'll do some of everything: education, banking, entertainment. Now, for older Americans, I'm doing some work on that currently, and if you look at older Americans and ask them why they don't have broadband at home, really the concerns about bad things that could happen on the internet, which would go to data breaches and that sort of thing, are big inhibitors to older Americans to using and getting broadband at home. So I think it's more front of mind for that demographic than others, but I think it's out there for all.
I just want to understand that older demographic would be one that is even more concerned about health and financial issues, and their institutions are requiring us to use online connections.
For older Americans, again, from survey data, they'll say that healthcare institutions expect them to have broadband. They actually say so at a much lower rate than the younger set of respondents in the Comcast Internet Essentials study, because I think the providers understand that a lot of them either don't have broadband or aren't as comfortable using it, so they don't feel those weight of expectations because the providers know they probably shouldn't push those concepts too hard on them. It just goes to show that there's not only an educational component that's very important for increasing or improving people's levels of digital readiness, but it also goes to sort of the far-flung institutions, banks, financial institutions, to be part of that equation of improving digital readiness.
So let me go ahead.
I'm sorry, Phil Grant, Booz Allen. I'd be interested in the point of view about how government can more effectively deal with what some analysts are calling the software-defined enterprise. In other words, I completely agree with the notion that the predominant focus has been on physical infrastructure, but what about the challenge of dealing with the whole ecosystem from applications all the way through? Who should do that in the government? Are there lessons to be learned from other countries? You mentioned Singapore, South Korea. How is this going to be dealt with on a going forward basis, given the technology is outstripping the ability of governmental agencies to really stay on top of all those developments? Virtualization, you folks are in the industry, so you understand this. But I'd be interested in how do you grapple with that, given the velocity of change?
First of all, it's not one thing, right? I would say that if someone were to say, should we do a 5-year update, I would say, actually, the next plan is fundamentally, just as the FCC is finally proceeding with Section 4.5, the IP transition of networks, the entire United States government as an enterprise has to transition to the IP or the digital platform.
Or Windows 7.
Or Windows 7, that would be good too. And it's a big systemic thing, and I think it takes, as we very sadly saw with healthcare.gov, there are lots of ways to do it badly. One way of doing it well, which got a little bit of attention but not enough, and actually Eric Garr would be much better at answering this question than me, because Eric actually worked on the website for the first agency actually conceived of and built in the internet age, which is the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, right? So if you go to that website, what you see is what is it when you have a consumer-facing agency that is designed from scratch to basically do that exercise or that activity. And I believe, Eric, if I'm right, it was something like 60-some% of consumer complaints are resolved without federal government human intervention because it shifts them and moves them in an effective manner. But this is actually a really big deal, and Nick and I have had a number of conversations about it, where I think you need somebody inside of government with tremendous political authority to simply say, okay, we're getting rid of paper. We're going to move to that world in which the data is collected and personalized and all that kind of stuff has got to be secure. It's a really big challenge for the government, and it's not the kind of thing that large enterprises do well generally, and it's particularly not the kind of thing that government does well, but it's going to have to be done eventually.
In coordination with Congress if they're getting rid of paper.
That's one of the reasons why it's difficult to get it done.
And I actually think that we're starting to make great progress, and some of this has been kind of below the radar screen. So we started on a number of the open data initiatives, which was simply how do you unlock the raw data. Essentially thinking about how do you do wholesale, right? How do you open up stuff so that third parties can build great services? But we also have to do retail well, right? Government delivers a set of services, and they have to deliver them digitally, and they have to be designed natively digital and mask the complexity, right? Too often with government technology and websites, we tend to project the complexity of government, but we really have to kind of flip it and think about the user needs. And so there's some great examples around the world. I think the UK's government delivery service, the GDS unit there, has been a startup unit, and over the last couple of years has really transformed and tackled how do you present government services in a kind of a real-time, always-on digital way that you've come to expect from internet services. And so we're starting to do the same thing. In fact, today GSA launched a unit called 18F and has a series of ex-presidential innovation fellows. This is something that my office has been very involved in, which is how do you bring ex-entrepreneurs and innovators into government, partner with folks in government for 6 to 12 month tours of duty to help change government. And a number of them have decided to stick around, and they've formed this unit called 18F. And part of their mission is to help this digital transformation that frankly we still have a long ways to go.
I just wanted to briefly say, and Mo may have some comments about this as well. I heard in your question also, and Blair alluded to it, private sector innovation, and I think that government can do a fair bit to enable private sector innovation, or at least not stifle it. And certain healthcare innovation is growing rapidly. There are a number of procurement and regulatory barriers in education that, while well-meaning in 1976 or 78 when they were created, had a lot of unintended consequences for a world that was not envisioned. And as a result, certain kinds of innovation are extremely complicated to enable for schools, and so they can't get the services they want, and therefore the demand isn't there, the expertise isn't there. I mean, I don't know if you want to go any deeper on net neutrality and that topic. Okay. but certainly that's another area that's obvious to me as an outsider. It's not my area of
Did you not get the memo, Steve?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear them.
Thank you.
Anyway, Mo may have some thoughts on, I don't know, on innovation.
Yeah, I think a couple of add-on points now sitting on both sides. I think to most extent, I think innovation or technology innovation will always outpace regulation. So Blair made a great point around the plan being beta. So I think the right structure has to be created where so where policy can react to what's going on in the marketplace and adapt appropriately. So going back to healthcare, I think reform and the Recovery Act and ITIF set a great sort of hole in the ground of where the world is going, and the marketplace has reacted to that and experimented and moved in the right direction. So I think the two biggest levers for government were based on payment reform, which is just carrying on, and also interoperability of data. But some of the experimentation going on in the marketplace is even more interesting because those initial, I think, movements. So when the interplay works well, the effect is much greater.
Great. So I'm going to let Blair have the last 60 seconds. I'm going to ask you a question, Blair.
Sure.
Do you think the plan should be updated? If so, leaving aside politics for a minute, changes in administration, whether the next one is a D or an R, when would you think of sort of just naturally the plan should be updated, and then bringing politics back into it, when would you think it should be updated?
I do think it should be updated, though it'll, in my opinion, probably be a lot less about infrastructure and go more to the question that you ask. It's an interesting debate about why we focus on speed and when it's appropriate and when it's not. But I think that primarily it is about this great transition, and data is a very key part of it. So I think most of the debates, most of the debates going on at the FCC today, in some sense, have a root at the plan. I think it's very good at the beginning of an administration to do a big IP transition, but frankly, my hope would be that whether it's you or it's someone else in approximately 2016 starts putting it in motion so that no matter who is elected, because most of these issues are really nonpartisan, can create something so that with the transition team, which turned out to be very valuable in all of this, there is a group of people, and many of whom have been recruited by Nick, who are eager to go into a new administration and try to do the kind of thing that Eric was able to do with the new bureau and create just a different way of delivering these services that's much more personalized, much more effective, much more targeted, and makes for more effective government.
That's great. So basically, the next administration should move towards drones in the cloud.
Yeah, something like that. Right.
All right.
With autonomous cars.
Exactly. Autonomous drones.
Autonomous drones
in the cloud. Powered by Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
Any other acronyms we want to throw out here, or buzzwords? Well, look, this is I found very, very interesting and helpful. Give us a sense of sort of where we are, and I think using my moderator's prerogative, I guess I would say we've made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot more to go. In part, just because the opportunities don't sit still. Each month, each year, each day, more and more opportunities, and we got to keep catching, staying so we can catch up with them. So anyway, so I want to thank all of you, and also Mo, thanks for joining us from San Diego, and please join me in thanking a great panel.